Thank you for having me. I don't know what she said about me, um, but I will tell you a little bit about myself. French is all we've got in Canada, so I can't even pick out any little words. I tried. I'm very excited to be here today to speak to you about what youth sports looks like I can't speak for all of North America, Canada especially, but from my understanding, similar to the US, although we're probably just a few steps behind the US as we are in most things, sort of a blend between the European culture and the American culture. So my name is Katie. I am a registered psychologist in Canada, so I am not on the academic side. I am a practitioner, so I have my own private practice in Edmonton, Alberta. So hockey is life in Edmonton. I grew up as a gymnast. I was a competitive gymnast in the late 80s, 90s, and I began coaching gymnastics shortly after that when I was a teenager. I coached for quite a long period of time, fairly high-level gymnastics before I decided to finish my training to become a psychologist. So my athletes that I see are almost entirely youth athletes. Most sports psychologists in Canada don't see kids under about 16, but with the way that sports culture is going, we have found that it is more important than ever to help younger athletes just with the type of environment that they're facing compared to when I was a young athlete. So I'm a very, very busy one-woman show because of the nature of what sports is in Canada right now, which I'm going to talk about. So this is my son, actually, the one in the white here. He is 10. He's a good little hockey player. I will bring him up once or twice here. So as I said, I see almost entirely youth athletes, so variety of sports. Doesn't seem to be a huge difference in the type of environment that athletes are facing, whether it's soccer, gymnastics, hockey, figure skating. Youngest I typically will see kids is about 8. And the younger they are, the more I will involve their families. So the less control they have over their environment, so the more I will attempt to bring families into treatment methods. But I started on this path, this research, this pet project for me because I was seeing a lot of trends in the athletes that I was seeing where parents were bringing them to me because they were losing confidence, they were stressed out, and the parents wanted some help. But most of the things that they were bringing them to me for were related to the environment. Nothing that I could actually really change for the athlete. And I felt it was unfair to bring a small child to a psychologist to try and fix something that I felt quite certain the environment was causing. So that's sort of what led me on this path. This is what we're going to cover here today. So the history of why we got here. There's a lot of research. I did a meta-analysis on the research around what some of the problematic points of professionalizing youth sports are. I have some suggestions for what we could do to ameliorate that, and then a summary and hopefully some time for questions at the end. So this is me in, probably 1989. Something like that, in my, probably just my school clothes, threw my jersey on over top for pictures. That looks like a dollar store hat, and I'm pretty sure my mom would have used like a Sharpie to just draw the team logo on the front of the hat. She would sometimes use a stencil. We would come up with a team name, like the Ducks or the Elms or whatever it is, the Dragons, and then she would take everybody's hats home. She was the crafty mom, and she would use her colored Sharpies. And so all of this in community baseball in 1989 was very low stress. And I was probably a pretty decent little baseball player. I would have missed a lot for gymnastics. They wouldn't have cared. I probably was doing gymnastics 3 days a week. By that point, I'm probably about 6, maybe 7 here, and they wouldn't have cared. I probably would have rushed here from gymnastics for the pictures, and they would have thrown me in at the last minute. It doesn't look like anyone brushed my hair prior to this. So pretty low stress, pretty just joy of baseball, me trying a bunch of different sports, right? So this is, we'll say 1990. When I began coaching, it would have been about 1998. 1999, and already it was shifting. So there was no just, throw your jersey on over top of your school clothes at that point. The little girls I was coaching would have had a bodysuit for each day of the week for training. So, you wouldn't have had to go home and do the laundry. They would just have extra bodysuits. Their parents would maybe buy them one as a prize, whereas my mom handmade all of my gymnastics suits. I dreaded going to the fabric store with her because we would be in there for an hour, but I would get to pick out the fabric for my suits. So even though gymnastics is a very expensive sport, there were lots of ways for us to keep it manageable and affordable. And I was not the least bit embarrassed about my mom making my suits. In fact, my teammates would beg her to make them for them too. So very affordable. Quite a bit of change just 15 years later when I was coaching, and the girls I was coaching would go to a competition and their parents would buy them a suit. Every time we went to a competition and there was a vendor in the lobby, they would get a brand new bodysuit. So already you're starting to see the shifting. I also, as a pretty decent competitive gymnast, I never made the national team. I didn't make a national championships, but was a pretty good provincial level gymnast. The only time we ever traveled outside of our province, we heavily fundraised to do a fun trip to Hawaii for a competition when I was 14, and it was the highlight of my whole gymnastics career. And that was it. After 10 years of training, 20 hours a week, that was the only time we ever traveled outside of the country, certainly to compete. Nowadays, I don't have gymnasts. I have 2 boys. And nowadays, there is 1 international competition per season, pretty much in any club that you go to. So I have a couple of girlfriends that own a gymnastics club, and every single year they decide where they're going to go. We're going to go to Mexico, we're going to go to Hawaii, we're going to go to Florida, and it would be probably about $2,000, $2,500 to take, a parent and your 10-year-old to some competition in Florida. Typically, they're competing against kids the exact same level as they would have been competing against back home. So this is purely for fun, for enjoyment, but if you can't afford to go, even though these aren't mandatory, your child will feel left out. So it feels mandatory as a parent when you know that your child might be the only one who can't go. So things are shifting dramatically from the 90s to the 2020s in terms of what it costs, what the expectations are, and how professional we are treating younger athletes. So this is my good friend. This is her daughter. She is a pretty high-level gymnast. The bodysuit that she is wearing has Swarovski crystals on it. So this bodysuit is about 500 Canadian dollars. And this is their competitive suit. This isn't a training suit. This is the one they wear for competitions. But it is significantly more than anything. We had velvet suits in the 90s, and I'm sure they were not much more than $100 or so, and they were hot. They were not comfortable to compete in. So they're also, in addition to this bodysuit, she would have team gear upwards of about $1,000. So if you were in a private club, there is a requirement to have things like the matching coat, the matching track pants, the bag, all of the things that have to be branded. Okay, so this is for a private club. There are ways around that. My son competes in community hockey. We have chosen to stay in community hockey, not with a private hockey club. I know that doesn't exist in Europe, so I'll give you a little bit of a definition about what I mean so that you understand the difference between professionalized and private sports versus the community sports, because this is very much a debate for any sports parent in North America these days. So for community hockey, my son, we pay about $1,800 for the whole season. So that's 6 months. There is no requirement other than just their jersey, which you get with your fee. So he can wear whatever hockey gloves he wants, he can wear whatever stick, whatever helmet he wants. We get stickers to put on the helmet, so it's quite affordable. The only tournaments we do are within a 2-hour drive from our home. So very affordable. As a comparison, about half of his teammates at 10 years old have left to join private hockey clubs, and they will spend anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000 for their hockey season. They are getting a little bit more training, maybe 1 or 2 extra ice times that my son wouldn't get, but the coaches do not have more training. And the level is arguably the same. So very likely if the 2 teams were to play each other, the private team would likely win, but not by much, and possibly only because they're training more. They may not agree with that. But the biggest difference is the cost and the commitment. So because it is private, they are out of different arenas. So you're driving, some families will have to leave school early to make it across the city to get to their hockey training, whereas we are at community hockey rinks. So about 10 minutes from the house when we go to the rink. They're driving sometimes maybe 4 hours a week. Their hockey tournaments are sometimes they're getting on a plane to go to Vancouver for a hockey tournament or Toronto. So that's in addition to that $3,000 to $7,000. The travel would be on top of that. So some families are spending $10,000 for their 10-year-olds to play hockey, and that is not unusual where I'm from. And I would say some of these families would really struggle to pay that $10,000. It would come out of other things that the family would not be able to do. That is not extra money. Not everybody is wealthy there, so they're not taking family vacations, or they're not putting that money into university fund for their child. Now, the other thing that I'm quite sure doesn't happen very much here, although potentially it's popping up slowly, is that we're starting to see private and charter schools incorporated with sports. So we don't have a lot of private schools in Canada. That is definitely more popular in the US. We have charter schools, which are kind of a blend between a private school and a public school. So it's a small fee, and it's sort of a specialized program. So a charter school might have, say, a gifted program if your child has above a certain IQ, but it is mostly considered a public school. Now we are seeing popping up private sports schools or private sports organizations that attach themselves onto a public school. So you can apply to the public school and be entered into a hockey-specific program, a soccer-specific program, lacrosse, which means that the kids go to school in the morning and then they train their sport in the afternoon. So often what is happening now is you get a carpool of kids, they go straight to the school, they do their schooling until noon, and then there's a shuttle bus that takes them to the hockey arena or the soccer field, and then either the teachers or specific other trainers will train them all afternoon. And then they go to their club training in the evening. So there are often kids who are doing 4 to 5 hours of training per day. And it's a lot. And they are also now only with those same kids all day long. So often the school training is done with their teammates, and then those same teammates hop in the next van and they go to their club training in the evening. So it's a lot, and this starts usually around 6th or 7th grade. So, just as a general, what we're seeing in Canada, there wasn't a lot of research. So in 1982, we had a Stats Canada report released where we're seeing about $1,000 annually spent on recreation, but that would include not just sports, that would include things like movies, recreation, swimming memberships, things like this. So that is still quite a lot for 1982, but that includes a lot of other ways of recreation. By 1999, which is when I was still competing in gymnastics, there was an increase of 40% in recreation spending per household. And that was 25 years ago. We're projected to be $90 billion of gross output for North America in youth sports spending. That's just youth sports in North America. And I can see it plain as day with the types of tournaments that people are registering in and the types of gear and the types of training available. So it is a massively growing industry, and a lot of people are very attracted to it and trying to get into it. It grows daily. How did we get here? How have we grown that much? Why is it such a massive industry? Well, we have a lot of privatization. We have a lot, even though we are not the US, we have a lot of capitalism opportunities. So people have seen that there is opportunity to offer private training. They know that competitive parents want to give their kids a leg up, and there are no systems in place to prevent people from opening up their own type of private sports training facility. So you can open up a strength and conditioning program. I could open up a strength and conditioning program if I wanted to, with no training. And I could call myself a strength coach. I wouldn't have any numbers or initials after my name, but I could do it, and people do. A lot of athletes are really interested in staying involved in the sport. The ex-athletes, they want to find a way to make a career. They maybe don't want to change fields or go to university and get different types of training. So we see a lot of ex-athletes who do know the sport, but don't have any specific training in youth training, in biomechanics, things like this. But they have a name. They have an Instagram page. People know who they are. So a lot of ex-NHL players who live around us will open up hockey academy training. And kids will go there because it worked for them. So monetization is one major reason. There is a lot of profit to be made. Parents are also more involved than ever. We know that. I'm a millennial parent, so I know that. I mean, my husband and I are definitely much more involved in our kids' activities than my parents were. And I had pretty involved parents in the 80s, but it is exponentially more. Our kids don't do much on their own anymore. There's a lot of concern in North America about safety. I did get a chance to go and see the facilities here, and the kids just kind of, ride their bikes over and play soccer after school. There's not much of that because, first of all, distance. Everything is further apart where we are. So even the local facilities are a good 5 kilometers from your local schools. It's also cold. I mean, it's -20 where I came from. So there is no riding your bike. We are inside from November to February. So you do have to drive your children pretty much everywhere. And the other thing is parents are anxious. Parents are anxious about doing the best they can do for their kids. They want their kids to have every opportunity, and the knowledge isn't there. If you didn't grow up as a competitive athlete yourself, how are you as a parent supposed to know what the best training is for your child? It is very, very difficult. I'll tell you my personal story about that. As someone with that education, it is very difficult to find the right kind of provider for your child, and parents are easily swayed by their anxiety. And the private providers take advantage of this. They know that parents are anxious about giving their kids a leg up, and it's almost turned into a situation where we're selling our program, we're selling a dream, and we're trying to bring people in to our business just by selling them what we think we can do for their child. It's a little bit like selling a car in some ways. And I hate to make that comparison, but it does feel like that. So, as I mentioned earlier, what led me down this path was that I'm seeing how much of the psychological risk factors there are for teens, and now this is even younger and younger, because it used to be just 16-year-olds that were getting the private training, and now my son is on a AA hockey team, and he's 10. He just turned 10 last week, so he's in grade 4, and he does strength and conditioning on Wednesday evenings with a strength and conditioning coach who plays university hockey. I'm not entirely sure what his training is. I just kind of went with it because you can't question everything. But he's also on the ice before school on Wednesdays for an hour, Mondays after school, sometimes Fridays, and then they would have 1 or 2 games on the weekend. So he's got about 5 hours of hockey a week, which is manageable because it's local, but that's the community option, not the private, excessive option. So this is where the research comes in. So I was very interested to see what had been done on research for the private factors. There's no one study, so this is a meta-analysis. There's maybe a dozen different studies that I put together because sports psychology in North America isn't quite as developed academically as it is in Europe and in the Nordic countries. So a lot of the research I used was actually done on soccer. but some of the environmental conditions are the same. So these are the problematic factors that I was able to identify from the research and that I'm applying to our environment. So when you have things like private schools that are dedicated to sports, you're having decreased interaction with non-sport peers. And I see this a lot. So the amount of training that you're doing means you're only with your teammates the vast majority of the time. My son still goes to bed at 8:30. So he gets home from hockey and has dinner and does his 15 minutes of math homework. There is no opportunity for him to go and play with the neighborhood kids. Luckily, we are only doing it 3 times a week, so we have lots of time on the weekends. But if you are one of the families who is driving all the way to the other side of the city, you're not seeing your school friends, you're not seeing non-hockey friends. And same with the gymnasts. So if they're going to school with their teammates and then hopping in the carpool van to go to gymnastics, they only see those 4 teammates pretty much every day. So they're like siblings. They fight like siblings. And when they get to, say, junior high, we all know how challenging junior high can be for peers. There is no opportunity for them to escape. If they had a disagreement, they have to go to school with those kids the next day. They get no break. So plus, if they quit their sport, some of these kids have to change schools. So imagine if you're 14 and you decide gymnastics is no longer for you, or hockey is no longer for you, or you don't like the academy, and you're quitting your sport, you now have to go to a brand new high school with brand new kids. So your world is rocked. The other problematic factor is the explicit and implicit focus on performance outcomes. So when you're looking at a community program, my son's program in community hockey, they are looking at long-term developing these hockey players. Their coaches are not particularly worried about whether they win this season. They don't care about a championship. They want the kids to do well, but they're looking at long-term development. So when they make mistakes on the ice, they go, well, that's a mistake you have to make if you want to learn how to play that position. They don't get benched. They don't get yelled at. I mean, there's probably some coaches who do that a little bit in community hockey, but it's pretty relaxed because there's always a place for you in community hockey. Even if you're not playing at the AA level, you can drop down to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. The coaches are not too worried about it. When you are in private sports, you are running a business. So you are going to only draw people to your sport if your club does well. So they no longer have the benefit of looking at long-term development. When the kids make mistakes, they very much feel that a reflection of themselves as a coach or as a club. So there is a shift in what the outcome means. They cannot have the ability to just have kids make mistakes whenever they want and go, okay, well, no big deal, there's another game next weekend. So there is a level of stress that is constantly on the kids, even if no one is saying it, right? If we don't win this, I might not make this team next year. I might have to go to a different club. I might have to go back to community hockey, which to them feels like a failure. And I say implicit because I do think that there are a lot of coaches that go to these clubs with good intentions. They really think that they have the ability to train hockey players or gymnasts, but implicitly the environment is more stressful. It is much more focused on outcomes than the process of developing an athlete. The other thing that happens quite a lot that is very problematic is labeling. So the separation that happens very early on between a talented athlete or a not talented athlete. So I know talent identification is very hotly debated in the sports psychology community. There is quite a lot of research on early identification, but most of us know that it is not accurate. The earlier we try to identify, the less accurate we get. And that happens with IQ as well. So if you are measuring IQ at, say, 5 or 6 years old, it is not predictive of what IQ is going to be later on. It's the same for sports. And especially for sports like hockey, where puberty has such a big factor in how they will develop. Gymnastics and figure skating are kind of the only sports where you do need some early specialization and where puberty has a little bit less of an impact on where you're going to end up. Now, psychologically, though, and my focus is on the psychological impact of labeling, not necessarily whether or not we're labeling kids as future superstars. My focus is on what is the psychological impact of labeling a young athlete as either talented or not. And I think we can presume that if you are labeled as not talented, that can be a bit crushing to their ego or their confidence. But I actually am more concerned about the kids who are labeled as talented, because I see a lot of these kids as teenagers. So they were the early developer. They were the one that stood out by 6 or 7. They got put into the best groups. But every single person that sees them and sees how well they do on the field or on the ice says to them things like, you've got a bright future. You're going to be such a great athlete. You're going to be a star. You're going to play in the NHL one day. And they're well-meaning. These are well-meaning people. They're positive. They're trying to be encouraging and give the kids good feedback. But kids take it in, all of it. They take all of it in as messaging, as this is what we expect from you. This is what the world expects from you. This is your path. This is where you are going to go. And that's not what people are intending, but that is what children are hearing. Those are the messages that they're swallowing, and we had no way of predicting it. We had no way of knowing where this child was going to end up or what they were going to like when they were older even. So when they become teenagers, and what happens, we all know what's going to happen, a lot of kids have caught up. It happens to almost every single early developer. The other kids catch up. And this is very, very heartbreaking for the kids who've always been told they were a standout. They think something's wrong with them. What's wrong with me? Why am I not standing out anymore? But this was inevitable. It was inevitable that they were going to be caught up to. And if anyone's familiar with the AIMS questionnaire, I would suggest taking a peek at it. So it's the Athletic Identity Measurement Scale. This is it's like any questionnaire. It is self-answered, so there is probably some limitations to credibility, but I enjoy putting the 10 questions on a screen for teenagers and letting them know that the more they identify, the more their identity is linked to their athletic ability, the higher risk they are for things like depression. And there is research on that. But when we tell kids what their identity is going to be at 7 years old, how can they not have their athletic ability linked to their identity, their worth, right? So that's probably my biggest problematic factor, is the early labeling. So for my son, I know I'm gonna probably have to rush through the last little bit, but I will tell you this story because I think this one hit me really hard. My son at 6, my oldest, and I didn't grow up in a hockey family. I was a gymnast, of course, but I married into a hockey family, so I always knew we were gonna have a hockey player. We put him on skates before 2, probably 20 months or so. And he was just ear to ear, he loved it. I was like, well, this is gonna be my life. And we couldn't get him off the skates. I think he lasted longer than I did. And he was a very good skater. We put him in hockey at whatever the introductory level was at about 4.5. And he was not falling much. He liked to trip everybody. That was super fun for him, but he was a very early developer. And when you do the first sort of evaluations to make teams, they just time them to see how fast they can skate, because they want the kids to be able to be on teams with other kids, similar abilities, so that you're not crushing the other teams who can't skate, basically. But they don't share the times with the kids or the parents. So I had no idea what his time was when they did the evaluation. They put him on a team. And about halfway through that season, I got an email inviting him to try out for a AAA spring team. And spring hockey is not very common. And usually you just kind of, go September to March, and then you do other sports in the summer. So I was like, spring hockey, what is this? And it is the Wild West of hockey. So AAA, my 6-year-old who was in grade 1, who couldn't quite read yet, was invited to try out for a AAA hockey team, which I thought was very amusing. So I did not reply to that email, but we did end up on a spring hockey team. We found a coach who said, no, we're not going to do any of that. I just want the kids to have fun. They love hockey. Let's do it. We can compete against those other teams just by having fun. And I said, great. He loves hockey. Let's do it. Little did I know that this coach would get swept up in the Wild West of spring hockey too. So come spring, my 6-year-old who loved hockey, who'd never really thought about anything except skating and scoring goals, was getting benched because there were a couple other kids on that team who were better at scoring goals than him. And we had no warning. I'm sitting in the stands and going, he has not played. Like, he hasn't played at all in this whole third period, not stepped foot on the ice. And sure enough, he did not step foot on the ice for the entire third period of that gold medal game. And the coach just kept putting out the same 5 kids. And my son just, ushered to the back of the line on the bench, him and his other line mates who were probably just tired after playing 4 games that weekend and were not scoring too many goals. And he got into the car after and he said, "Mom, I didn't get to play very much." And he couldn't have cared less that his team won a gold medal. He didn't get to play very much. And that kind of broke me. So from then on, I've kind of made it my duty to maybe speak up a little more than I should in the hockey community. I'm probably not liked by some of the private providers because I just don't want people who don't have the education that I have and the foresight into what this could do to kids' confidence. I don't want them to go through that too. And they still do. And it is a tough balance for me to have my child in the sport, not make too many people angry, but try and educate as well. The excessive adult control and structure that we see nowadays in the professionalized youth sports can be quite harmful for kids. Now, we see this sometimes in the academic world as well. There is a lot more structure. There is a lot less free play, even at recess. My 6-year-old once was held in for recess. He got a detention for climbing trees, which, trust me, that was I laughed too. I got the email halfway through the day that he was held in for recess at lunchtime to think about what he did. And I was like, well, he didn't think about it. There was definitely no reflecting going on. And I, again, have to bite my tongue a little bit because I don't want to make too many people angry, but I had compiled about 4 articles of how important risky play is, and my husband begged me not to send it because he's a teacher. He works in the division. So I said, fine, I won't send it, but I'm not telling him to not climb trees. So there is a lot of control and a lot of structure, and this is meaning that kids can't really make very, very quick decisions anymore. They are so used to being told what to do and when that they have a lot of trouble figuring out how to solve problems for themselves, and that is translating into sports, right? When our drills are so structured, and then kids get into a game opportunity, how are they going to read the plays when you haven't given them that exact scenario in a practice, right? So I know that there's a lot of research on what kinds of drills and what kind of plays we should be giving kids, but we absolutely need to be giving them the unstructured opportunity to develop their decision-making in games as well. And lastly, the program demands are really increasing environmental stressors. So as I said, the driving that takes place, so if you have siblings, and I know families that this happens to, if you have 2 or 3 kids and your one hockey player is playing in a private league or your one gymnast goes to a specialized sports school. I live in the suburbs, and there's no sports schools in the suburbs. So there's no bus, there's no school bus to the private program because it's out of your division. You're driving your child where the other 2 are getting on the bus to the local school. So your siblings may not see each other very much. One parent is very likely, it's a divide and conquer situation where one parent is managing these 2 kids and the other parent is just driving the other one around all the time because it's so much management. They're traveling with that one team. They're taking that time off work. The financial stress that comes along with paying for these private programs. So there is a lot of environmental stressors that these programs can bring on families, and the overall vibe, as a practitioner, I can tell you when I see children, the vibe, the stress that happens in a household can be very problematic for kids. If I see an 8 or a 9 or a 10-year-old with anxiety, there's not a lot I can do for them if their household is always under stress. Whatever I do in the 1 hour every 2 weeks that I see them is not going to undo living in a stressed household. So this is, yet again, one more factor that can be quite problematic with the professionalization. So my suggestions, this is my son again, can see. This was actually, I think, probably just a few months before that spring season, and he still has the joy of hockey, but the very fancy jersey that somebody custom made, custom logo, and a sponsor on the shoulder there too, which is a bit silly for a 7-year-old. But My suggestions are, community organizations need to step up. We will continue to lose kids to the private organizations if the community organizations are not run well. So I worked for a nonprofit gymnastics club for 15, 18 years, and it was incredibly frustrating a lot of the time. We were run by a board of parents, but of course there's politics, right? And somebody wants to get on the board so that they can give their child a leg up. There's also mismanagement of money a lot of the time in nonprofits. Underpaid, the staff is underpaid. So I was, a full-time employee at a gymnastics club, working like a dog and making very little money. The equipment, the facilities, sometimes not so great. So I think community organizations really need to make sure that if they want to keep people, that they're doing the best job that they can to make it enjoyable, convenient, fun, and successful, and then we won't lose as many kids. The academies, so the private organizations, need to do a better job of vetting and training their staff. The only way I see this happening is if there is enforcement from governing bodies. They are not going to do it on their own. So I was sharing with the other presenters this morning that there's a hockey league, a local league where I live, Junior A, so it is, they're high school kids, they're very high-level hockey players, potentially going off to NCAA scholarships, we'll say this level. They left our league to leave Hockey Canada into a private hockey league because they don't want to follow the rules that you have to follow when you have underage players. So a certain amount, they're only allowed to travel X number of days a week because they're still in school. You're only allowed a certain number of international players. They didn't want to follow any of that. They wanted to just do what they wanted so that they could win. So they left Hockey Canada. So now there is no enforcement. It is completely private. So we don't know if there are complaints about coaches. That's maybe kept, maybe not kept in a file somewhere. We don't know what their training is. We don't know if those kids are even being told to go to school or if someone's doing their homework for them. So it's very scary when they're leaving the governing bodies. So I would say that the government, I know that happens here, the government in Canada and the US really need to be a little bit more stringent on the regulation for youth sport and what is required of a governing body. Maybe they can't get insurance if they are not part of a governing body, things like that. There is some control for the government to be able to do that and keep kids safe. I don't know who it was that was helping me check time. Okay.
You still have 5 minutes until I ping you.
Until I ping me for question time, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think this was my last slide anyways. I did it. So these are my guys on our mountains, if anyone's ever been to the Rocky Mountains. Occasionally we do miss a little bit of hockey. And that's the other reason why we're in the community organization, because if you weren't, it would be a big slap on the wrist to miss hockey practice to go skiing for the weekend. But luckily, that doesn't happen in the community program. We're here. I brought my boys here, so we missed hockey all week so I could bring them to your beautiful country, and I think they're going to the Penis Museum today. They're very, very excited about that. And I may miss it, but I'll hear about it. And the grade 2 and 4 classrooms will hear about it too when we get back. Yeah.
So this one's work? Yeah. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. So we have a few questions in Slido.
Yeah, of course.
Nej.
I don't think that
Var
one's
det
working.
kveikja on? Hallå, hallå. Ita reida kvita.
I heard.
Hello, hello.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a few questions from Slido. Do you notice a difference between community versus private sports client athletes in regards to dealing with low self-esteem and perfectionism?
Yeah, great question. I absolutely do. Yeah. And this is very tricky for me as a practitioner because if we have any other practitioners here, it's not my place to tell people what decisions to make for their family. I can certainly help them self-reflect. I can help them with some research, but ultimately I want those kids to come to me. I don't want to say, don't be a part of that program because I may never see that child again. But yes, I absolutely see a lot more perfectionism, a lot more anxiety because of everything I mentioned, because of the explicit focus on outcomes for kids that are far too young to be focused on just outcomes. And because their identity is so linked, their worth and their identity are linked so heavily to how they perform from one game to the next. Even if they have a bad game, immediate loss of confidence and increase in anxiety.
Okay, and when working with children that are talented, what is the right way to go about speaking with them, and how do you maintain their interest and enjoyment?
Yeah, I mean, talented kids, there does need to be some separation. I mean, we do need to have ways of identifying talented kids, because we can't have the kids who are the early developers directly competing against the other kids, because it's not helpful for either one of them, right? If you have a child who's brand new to soccer and you want them to love soccer, you're not putting them up against the kid who is really naturally talented, because they're going to feel inept. So we do need some way of putting kids into groups where they're going to be challenged, where the level of ability is similar, but we don't need to label it. We don't need to talk about it. We don't need to give them priority type of training. We don't need to give them separate facilities, different titles, uniforms. We don't need to put them in different schools. I mean, there are ways to group them without titling them. Because the title and the label is what creates some of those internalized messages of, we think you're going to go here.
Okay. Many clubs are dividing kids early into talented or not talented, around maybe 11 or 12 years old. What would be the smart way to handle it, like for the clubs, coaches, and the parents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, 11, 12 is... I mean, it's not 6, so I already think that's a bit of a leg up, because I do see that in certain sports, gymnastics especially. So I would probably refrain from using that word talented, to be honest. I mean, I don't think that kids need to, I don't know if anyone's familiar with growth mindset type work, but the kids that are told they are talented are going to see it as a thing that they just are, a way that they were born. And if you have kids that are told you're talented or you're not, or even at 11, 12, by using those terms, how is it motivating for a child who doesn't think they are talented? If they just think they don't have it, they're not going to work harder to improve, right? There's no motivation for them. And if you're not familiar with Angela Duckworth's work on grit and growth mindset, then I would highly suggest it. There's some research on how kids' motivation is impacted by simply thinking that they can improve versus they're fixed in their ability. And talent has that. That word talent seems to invoke ideas of, well, it's fixed, right? So I prefer to focus whenever possible, and when I work with coaches, we always prefer to focus on your effort level and small goals. So, rather than outcome goals, it's like, well, my goal for this season is to improve my dribbling. And whether you're talented or whether you have inherent natural ability or not, anybody can improve their dribbling. Those are much easier things to measure a child's progress by. Yeah.
There's a similar question here, and it ends with, what are the risks of operating private in a way that focus on talents?
Yeah, I mean, that is, I touched on that briefly. And I do see this again, we see this a lot, where kids who are labeled as talented, specifically I can speak to the hockey world, it can create some hierarchies, some social hierarchies, peer-wise, where, my son luckily goes to a French school, and there's a huge variety of types of kids at his school, and not a lot of hockey players. But if you go to a school where there are other kids, they will naturally put themselves into the categories. So, oh, well, here's the tier 1 players, and they play together at recess, and here's the tier 2 players, and they do it themselves. Which is not great, because at grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, maybe not a big deal, but by the time they get to junior high, there are a lot of risks with that. There are social risks with that. And then if you don't make a team, you got to go to school the next day, and you've only had these friends and been part of this group for years, and now what? So again, it's the identity, it's the linking of their identity to the level of sport that they play or how successful they are that I see as the highest risk for youth.
Okay, if gymnasts and figure skating need earlier specialization, does that mean that they are not feeling the anxiety like other children's in other sports?
No. No, they definitely are. I think those things are separate. I think, scientifically, we know that figure skating and gymnastics, just by the nature of the sport and what you have to do biomechanically in those sports, dance, ballet would be included as well. It's just more necessary to have them start earlier because it's harder to train bodies to do the things that they need to do when they get older. It's out of necessity. My argument for it is that we don't need to be doing it in hockey and soccer because it's actually not even beneficial. So why are we doing it? Unfortunately, you do kind of have to do it in gymnastics in order for them to be successful. So you just have to make sure you're taking all the precautions you possibly can to not have them develop the low confidence.
Do you meet with parents to help them navigate the jungle of private or community sports, and how can they seek information about the environment?
Yes, I do. As I mentioned, the younger the child is, the more I will involve the parent in our treatment, in our work. Not every practitioner does that. It's kind of up to you. Some practitioners don't involve parents at all. They have a very strict policy on, no, I only see the child and everything we talk about is private. My personal opinion is that kids can't change things for themselves. They do need support from their environment, from their family. And I always think it's helpful for parents to, with the child's permission, know what we're working on so that they can do it in between our sessions. Occasionally, I will work with coaches. So I have about 6 hockey teams that I work with. Those are all, none of you will be surprised to hear this, those are all community organization hockey that have hired me. I have never once been hired by a private hockey club to do sessions with their athletes or coaches. And very likely this is speculation, but that's probably because they know that the things that I'm going to say are maybe not in line with what they're going to be teaching the kids. So I will say things like, you can't be focused on an outcome. If you want to be effective on the ice, you need to be more focused on what you're doing from moment to moment. And they, of course, are very focused on outcomes, so they don't like it when I say that. The coach will say, well, my kids are so worried about making mistakes, they're playing really cautious. And I say, well, that's because you're benching them every time they make a mistake. And they don't like it when I say that either. So there are quite a few community organizations that are really committed and they really want their coaches to be educated on how to talk to youth athletes. And I really appreciate the shift that we're seeing and the buy-in that we get from the community organizations just by hiring sports psychologists and having me work closely with the teams, yeah.
Okay, there's so many questions coming in. Good job. Often the parents are the problem, trying to make their child professional at an early age. How to tackle it?
Well, to a certain extent, you will never tackle all of it. But I think the best thing that we can do is keep those parents around other parents who are more level-headed. When you have the professionalized, the private organizations, they're all together. They're all in one spot, and it is not a fun place to be. I don't go to those, but I have heard on several occasions of police having to be called. I'm not kidding. I wish I was kidding. Just from whatever's going on between parents in the stands, or for referees to ask to be escorted out to their car. And never once have I seen that. My son's only 10. It may happen in higher level community hockey as well, but I've never seen anything like that in community hockey. We haven't paid the money. We're not as stressed. I didn't forego family vacations for hockey, so I'm not really that worried about them losing a game, I guess.
All right, I guess I will take 2 more. Should children at a younger age focus on their performance or on their goals, determined by their self-confidence and mental health?
Yeah, never performance for younger kids, especially under 12, maybe 14 even. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, even pro athletes have to focus. They can't think too big picture or it becomes overwhelming and they lose sight of exactly what they have to do in that moment to be successful. So yes, their overall goal is performance, but they still have to focus on what they're doing just in that moment. But for younger kids, I guarantee they have no idea. If I showed my kid he played 7 games last week. He had a big tournament showcase kind of thing. I guarantee you, if I showed him those 7 games and said, which one did you play the best at, he would be way off, like completely way off. He does not have the ability to self-assess what his performance was. So there is no point in having younger kids judge how they're doing by their performance, because they're not accurate.
Okay, last question for now. Iceland is developing a lot towards early professionalism. How do we change it back, or should we?
You should, yeah. Yeah. This is the cautionary tale from Canada. I think I loved to see the kids in their school clothes playing soccer yesterday when I went over there, and it made me a little nostalgic. You just don't need it. Like, I'm always one, even though I'm a practitioner and not an academic, we should be doing things that are based on research and evidence, and it's not necessary. The kids who are going to make it are very likely going to make it. And we don't need to be doing things for the sake of looks or money, or, I mean, if it's extra fun or enjoyment for the kids, great, go do that extra fun competition in the next town or the next country. Of course, do those things. But if you don't really need it for the kids to develop and it increases stress for the family or the child, just don't do it.
All right, let's give her applause.